of all, thanks for coming over here. Even though short drive, but still, coming over here.
Of course.
And maybe let's get started with some introductions. So we'd love to hear about your kind of story, your journey, what you do.
Yes.
What does Florence does?
Yeah, and so we're an intimate bunch here. I think a conversation, anything that you guys want to learn, if you're looking into Conductor or Orkes or anything, I'm here to share the story as a customer. But my personal story is 10 years ago, I co-founded a company, a SaaS company. I spent a bunch of time at the very beginning, 2 blocks or 2 buildings from here at the ATV when we started. It's a software for clinical trials, clinical research, basically. The process in which new drugs and medications and the next pacemaker or etc. That is the process that brings clinical research is the process that brings new drugs to market. And it's a huge industry, and we support a small component of that. And I'm a believer in a very boring business in the sense that we help moving documents, right? But what we do is that we give the day back to all those nurses and doctors that are actually taking care of a patient because they're so overburdened by little paper or documents or signatures. One of the stories that I like to tell, basically, that we encounter at the very beginning is nurses. You're in Atlanta, for example, from Emory or Winship. They have to go in pairs, 2 nurses, hop in a car, go to the other campus. One of them is circling the campus around because they don't have a badge or parking or anything to go to the other campus, while the other nurse is chasing a doctor that may or may not be available. So can you imagine these people are taking care of patients that are in a clinical trial because no medication or no treatment is available at the time, and the people that are taking care of those patients are just chasing doctors just for a signature. So something as simple as an electronic signature can really save a life. Why? We receive comments from time to time saying, hey, thank you for this because we were able to enroll this patient in this clinical trial before the weekend or before the doctor went away for a week or so. So it's the small stuff that we help, and it's very relevant to today's conversation, because all we do is workflows. Right. And how can we make workflows faster, better, easier, and the conversation today is very relevant to that. So that's what we do. We've been doing this 10 years. We started working with you guys about a year ago, and we'll talk about our experience. So.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious to know, right? Like when it comes to workflows, people have different connotations about workflows, right?
Yeah.
Workflow can be anywhere from what you do as an individual person to for an enterprise, it means very different things. Like what led you kind of believe that for solving this problem, you should look at an orchestration platform like Conductor, for example, right? As opposed to building something on your own or, trying to do it differently.
Yeah, so we are a startup. You could debate that. We're about 250 people. You could argue we're still a startup or not. But when you're making decisions at the very beginning, when you're 3 people in a room or across the street at the ATV in a tiny office, and you're making decisions, you just need to make do, right? And you do things with whatever you have available. And if you look back, you're thinking, why in the world did I make those decisions? But it's all you had, right? And even today, almost 10 years later, we're still looking at stuff that we did a few years back. And it's like, how in the world we did that? And again, it's a lot of times when you're a startup or when you're in a company with limited resources, maybe very rich company, but with limited resources in your team, you try to maybe create a POC, demonstrate something, right? And if you look back, that's an inefficient process. So one of the things that really attracted me from Conductor is that there's a lot of infrastructure in place that I don't want to be building. And I'm telling my team, I don't want you guys building infrastructure. I don't want you to build, a connection or a monitor or a logging when there's infrastructure in place. We're an AWS shop, right? So we have all of our infrastructure in AWS, and we use Lambdas and we use a bunch of stuff. But even that we're still building infrastructure, right? And to me, as CTO, spending time building infrastructure is a waste of time. Is time that I could be building a very specific task that can help in a part of a process or building the whole workflow, but I don't want to be monitoring or I don't want to be paying attention how I log these better when there are tools that are that. So to me, among other tools, of course, Conductor became that, right? Is I don't want to touch on any infrastructure if it's already provided, by a solution like yours.
Like I think probably what AWS calls is undifferentiated heavy lifting, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So can you tell us a little bit about in terms of are these like the internal workflows or is it something that you expose to your customers? What's the
Both, because one of the things that we found very, very critical in our industry is that healthcare and clinical research in particular is a very slow-moving industry. You go to your doctor's office and they have the EHR, right, electronic health records, or the EMR, medical record, right? That's because there was a law a few years back that forced them to do that, right? And there's no law in clinical research to take the charts. They're called shadow charts because these are special patient charts. And they're still on paper because there's nothing that pushes them. But if you look at the finance industry or other industries, we're in healthcare, we're kind of catching up 20 years after what has happened in other industries. So there's a lot of kind of a slow moving pace of progress, and those are some of the things that we have to deal with.
Right?
We're solving those problems, and technology is a great help. But there are still very inefficient processes that we as a company, we don't think that we can come and replace them right away. So we need to adapt to those things, and if we do incremental changes, if we make incremental steps, that's how we think we're changing, we're helping change the industry. Because it's an industry that is very, very reactionary in innovation. It's hard to kind of...
And I guess beyond just the industry, right, eventually kind of trickles down to us as people also, right? Because it overall benefits us as if things become more efficient.
Absolutely.
And I remember when you used to get a printout from a doctor's office, as opposed to now you can just log in and you can get all the records and you can analyze and plot it and everything.
Yeah, there are in our industry there are so many things that are just about moving documents, and these are documents that are mandated by the FDA, and there's a good reason for that, right? Again, I'm talking about clinical research. If what the Tuskegee trials were, a century ago, it was an abuse on people, right? And the FDA and other international agencies create these processes to make sure that they're protecting patients. So we take that as this is, at the end, is for the benefit of the patient. There have been really bad things happening. So we take that and we adapt to that industry. So anything that we can do so a nurse doesn't have to hop in a car with someone else to go somewhere else, and if we can streamline the sequence of events, an orchestration tool is really helpful in those sense, in that sense. And it can be small things, but if you do this over and over and over, that has a big impact. So this is not about the complexity and how revolutionary the new processes are. It's about let's create incremental, or sometimes very impactful changes. So.
Interesting. And when people think about building modular systems, right? The very first thing that comes to mind is let's build microservices.
Mm-hmm.
Did you consider doing that, and what led you to believe that instead of just building microservices, okay, let's also put them together with orchestration, or focus more on the event orchestration?
It was really a lot about, to me, again, in my CTO role, it was about avoiding infrastructure. And when you look at something like Orkes or Conductor, where you can literally draw on the screen kind of a sequence of events, basically a workflow, right? Like a flow chart. You're defining a process. So that's something that someone who is not a technical person can do. They just want to know what the steps are, right? I need this, and I need this piece of information, and I need this process, and I need to extract this. But they could draw it. So I think it's a very interesting opportunity to also bring people that are not necessarily engineers, but that can think in that sequential way or that workflow type of thinking, and participate in the creation of the processes. But we're not perfect by any means. We still have a big monolith that we're trying to break into smaller chunks. And to us, this is a way to help with that, right?
Absolutely, that's interesting. Yeah, we have seen a lot of kind of recent news about microservices and how it introduces complexity as opposed to simplification. So it's interesting to hear your perspective there. It seems like you are trying to combine them together to even simplify by putting the right platform in place.
It's really about being opportunistic. There may be something in your system that if you break it apart and you make it a very reusable thing, it has a lot of value. Whereas breaking some things apart, maybe that doesn't have that much value. It's okay, that remains in a big monolith. So one example is, because we're regulated, we have the concept of an audit trail. And an audit trail is nothing else than a log, just that is business friendly, right? In terms of, hey, someone read a document, someone signed a document. So it's not comprehensive, but it's business. It has a lot of business value. In fact, audit trails are regulated in the sense that anything that has, for example, a signature, you need to know why the signature was created. So was it an acknowledgement or was actually an approval? Those things are very important. So for us, an audit trail is the simplest of the simplest. Like you write, and eventually you have to read to display the trail. So that's an example where we started kind of breaking things apart and feeding that audit trail now from multiple applications, because when we build new applications, because of the regulation, we also have to have an audit trail. And what is an audit trail? A timestamp, an event type, and some metadata. Right? So we actually can use something like Orkes to be kind of the backbone in terms of communication and in terms of feeding that service and making it very simple. We don't have to build infrastructure. We don't have to build the process of what happens if I lose an event. It's a critical event. I mean, if a signature doesn't show with all the details that I mentioned, that piece of document is not valid, and that document may bring a whole trial down because, for example, when you have a rare disease or a trial that has a minimum of participants, and you need 30 people, and the 30th person has all the documents in place, but everything about the signatures is not in place, someone in the FDA is going to say, this doesn't count. We don't know if this was truly approved or not. That literally can bring down the whole trial.
Yeah.
And can delay for years a medication or a treatment or something. So it's really important. And I don't want my team building kind of the logic around that. I want something that is a special purpose tool that allows me to kind of trust, so that I can trust, and that allows me to do all of that. So
makes sense. Like basically, you want your team to focus on solving the core business problem,
value-added
rather than
tasks.
trying to
Yes.
focus on front-end
Yes.
side.
To me, infrastructure is not value-added from the perspective of my team building it.
Right.
I want to use it as I use electricity and the water in the faucet. It's extremely important what happens if we don't have electricity right now, but I don't want any of us thinking about electricity.
Yeah.
That's how I perceive what infrastructure is. Right?
Absolutely. I think that's a very nice perspective there. So like, what have you seen so far? Is it too early to say like what kind of changes or impact that you see having something like Conductor in your infra stack now?
So it has been kind of a slow process in the sense that I don't have all my team kind of using it or looking at it, but I have I have two teams working with Orkes daily. Is a team that manages all integrations, so it's data coming in and out of our system. That is very useful because again, it serves as a middleware. Middleware defined as software in the middle, right? It can feed and transform, or get a feed of data, transform it and send it somewhere else, or get inbound data, transform it and put it in our system. That's one of the big use cases, and I have people just working on Orkes all the time for that. Another is some automation that enhances kind of our application, like backend processes that don't make sense to be added to the application itself, but are processes in the background that add value eventually. So it's basically data transformation and aggregation, etc. Those are two big use cases. But I want my PMs thinking in terms of, hey, what is a solution that we can kind of cobble together, and the engineers only work in the tasks that create a solution, rather than in the whole process and what is in monitoring requirements and what are the logging requirements, and I don't want them to be thinking about that.
So that brings up an interesting point, right? Like we also have a session after some time on the Bedrock. Like there's a lot of talk about Gen AI and how it is going to impact or really impacting some of the industries, right? Where do you see the impact of Gen AI when it comes to healthcare or in a special area? Like, are you thinking about Gen AI for your cases?
Yeah, and there are different perspectives on this. Again, in the pharmaceutical industry, there's companies out there and organizations thinking about new molecules, right? There are like similarly to materials, right? There are companies figuring out new materials. The way I am perceiving and using AI is more. I told you about the boringness of a process that I fully embrace. It could be more boring than moving documents. We do it for a purpose, right? But it's more about I'm taking AI as a consumer of anything that is out there, right? It started with ChatGPT and then LM and now all the solutions like Bedrock. What can I do? What is the low-hanging fruit that we do with that? And for us, because we're document management, is that, hey, we could, for example, implement a semantic search instead of just a regular search. And we created a prototype because we have a lot of documents. Or could we use some basic prompt engineering to feed a document and summarize it, right? And that's the type of things that initially when we were building some of those things, we connected to some of those APIs. And in some conversation with you guys, it's like, hey, you actually can do it directly from Orkes. And we started kind of replacing some of those things. Why? Because I don't want to maintain the infrastructure, right? I want you to be able to connect me with a model, and if I want to change the model, I change the task. So I think that's the value and it's been great to see you guys kind of enabling some of those services and those connections. So I think that's a pretty cool aspect of that.
So moving towards the end of it, right? Like any kind of piece of advice for people who are trying to get started in terms of either managing platforms or infrastructure teams, or trying to think about, how should they think about, how do I structure my platform engineering, or how should I structure my platform infrastructure, that allows me to kind of give a greater velocity for my businesses, right?
Yeah, I think the start small is a very easy way, right, of doing this. And the interesting thing about orchestration is that it doesn't change the way you think about software. If you build software, there's a control flow, right? There are loops, there are forks and all those things. All of that are basics and primitives are part of a solution like Orkes. And building a very basic solution. What happens when you need to, there's an event in a service and you want to record it, or you want to distribute it, or you want to do something basic. And that's how you start building. That's how we started. We started with most basic workflows, right? And now we have a team that is very comfortable, and now we have a team that is asking for new features, right? Because they understand now the potential. But it's so easy to start. And again, I mean, I bet that we could spend an hour here and we could connect to a Yahoo Finance API and a Weather API, and in no time you have a very fancy workflow kind of sending notifications, because all of that is built. And you could do that with code, but you could be building that little thing production ready, right? Because it has all the monitoring, all the retries, all the rate limiting, and all that. That is part is basically configuration, right?
Yeah. So, great. All right. That's the end of the line for my questions. But thank you so much for coming over here, sharing your insights. I think we all kind of walking away from some new information here, some new knowledge. So really thank you for coming down here.
It's been a great partnership. Yeah. You guys have been really great in the support that are providing my team. We're connected via Slack channel, and have Viren on a Slack channel helping us with stuff at different times, right? So of course that's not what you do all the day, but your team has been really great.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.